Good morning, everybody. If you watched my last interview, the Vice Admiral Mark Norman, Part 1, you'll know that, Manny Ottawa is tweeting about this, and it's a pretty big deal. I think it's a very big story, and I'm going to reread Manny's tweet and give you the too long didn't read if you didn't watch the first 20-minute video, which is totally fine, I understand. Manny says, more vile hypocrisy by Trudeau. Government ran on transparency. Canada's Vice Admiral Mark Norman is in a criminal trial. Trudeau will not release documents. Blames Harper. Harper said release all to help defend Admiral. Media silent. Trudeau complicit. And I like these. I like following Manny, and him and I disagree on a bunch of stuff, but that's okay. He's got experience and a different perspective than I do, and I appreciate his point of view. So it's interesting. So in the last interview, I told you guys basically who Mark Norman is. He's a vice admiral. He was second in command of the Navy. What Davies Shipyard is, what Project Resolve is, and what happened to, what they're accusing Mr. or Vice Admiral Norman of, and they're accusing him of leaking information, giving Davy the contract and ensuring they get the contract and keep the contract, stifling a 2-month delay that the Liberals wanted as soon as they got into office. And basically the Liberals were really, really upset about it. So if you want details, read this article or watch my first video and you'll have more details. Here we go with the second part. So we're going to get to Stephen Harper's tweet about not being opposed to sharing government documents to protect the Admiral or to give the Admiral a fair trial, because that's really what's at stake here. Okay, so back to this. So the RCMP Corporal Boulanger, in charge of the investigation, believed that Norman provided information alleged to include cabinet confidences to Fraser. Norman did that, according to the RCMP, quote, to influence decision makers within government to adopt his preferred outcome of providing the Asterix supply ship to the Royal Canadian Navy. The RCMP also believed that Norman was the, quote, friend Vicefield had mentioned in a number of emails. Cudmore's reporting made clear that someone had disclosed confidential information from the cabinet committee meeting, the police force alleges. Although the RCMP acknowledged it didn't know how Cudmore obtained the Irving letter, they alleged that Norman knew the journalist had a copy or had been informed about the contents of Cudmore's article before it was published. And I skipped down. Several hours later, and this is the arrest of Mr. Vance, or not arrest, but the professional and personal consequences for Mr. Vance explained. And I'm including this. I think it's important because this happened in Canada with no explanation to the public, no explanation to Mr. Norman or Vice Admiral Norman. He was just removed, and no national security. This is about shipbuilding. This is about politics. So it's really, really, really interesting that it's been 2 years and they're not doing anything on this file. There's a court appearance scheduled, and we're going to look at all the most up-to-date stuff. There was something published on December 17th, so I'm going to get there. But this happened in Canada. Be aware. Okay, be aware. So, quote, several hours later, Vance's chief of staff called Norman and informed him that the CDS wanted to see him at 6 p.m. that day. Norman arrived unaccompanied to Vance's office. The general was there with Forrester. Vance had handed Norman a draft notice of his intent to relieve the naval officer of his military duties. Quote, I have compelling, sobering, and frightening information, Vance told the naval officer, although he provided no details. Quote, do you have anything to say for yourself? Vance asked. Given the severity of Vance's statement, Norman said he wanted time to consult a lawyer, and, concerned that his response might be turned over to police and potentially used against him, Vance asked Vance about the legal status of any response he would provide. Neither the general nor Forrester could answer his question. Instead, Vance said he needed a response in 24 hours. Norman asked for more time. Within 45 minutes, the meeting was over. On Thursday, January 12th, Vance once again requested a formal response from Norman, again providing no explanation for his removal. On Friday, January 13th, Vance informed Norman that he had run out of time. Admiral Ron Lloyd, who would be appointed as acting vice chief of the defense staff. Norman was given a formal letter suspending him from command. In the letter, Vance wrote without explanation that he had lost confidence in Norman's ability to command. There would be no internal hearing, no formal opportunity for Norman to present his side of the story. The decision was based on the unproven claims that underpin the RCMP search warrant. On that morning, Monday, January 16th, Vance's letter was distributed to various offices at National Defense Headquarters in Ottawa. It only took 20 minutes to be leaked to media outlets. DND's Public Affairs branch would officially distribute it to news organizations later that day. Beyond that, though, Vance ordered a blackout on all information about Norman. The Canadian forces refused to say why the Vice Admiral had been removed, when Norman was given Vance's letter, whether Norman was still serving, and if so, in what job or capacity. It also refused to explain why it couldn't answer such basic questions. Vance, meanwhile, had left the country, but the military wouldn't say where he had gone or why, or even when he'd departed. It would later emerge that he was in Europe for meetings. Asked about Norman's removal, Trudeau declined to provide any details. Vance had made the decision, Trudeau said, and his government fully backed his defense chief. Saijan released a statement that echoed Trudeau's word, almost word for word, which has become pretty normal in Canada these days. Only in Canada could the second highest ranking military officer in the nation be removed from office without a word of explanation. The lack of information fueled gossipy theories in political, defense, and media circles. Military personnel wondered whether it was related to sexual misconduct. Perhaps Norman was a Russian spy, others mused. After 10 days of allowing speculation to percolate about the reasons for Norman's dismissal, Saijan announced what the government had known all along. This is not an issue of national security, the minister told journalists. No other explanation was provided. So why did it take Saijan so long to make clear that the investigation wasn't a matter of national security? Saijan declined to answer the question, but Norman's supporters say the government and military silence significantly damaged the Vice Admiral's reputation. Some claim it was deliberate effort to damage Norman in the public eye. On February 23rd, the high-profile Toronto criminal lawyer Marie Henein, sorry if I got your name wrong, newly famous for her successful defense of former CBC host Gomeshi, entered the fray on Norman's behalf. Her new client, she said in a statement, quote, has at all times served his country honorable and with the sole objective of advancing the national interest and the protection of Canada. It would be a profound disservice to us all if a national hero and widely respected Canadian who has served under numerous governments was caught in the bureaucratic crossfire. I jumped down. Weeks later, Trudeau made a bold prediction. Norman was going to trial. Quote, this is an important matter that is obviously under investigation and will likely end up before the courts, so I won't make any further comments at this time, Prime Minister told journalists on April 6th. The comments alarmed Norman's supporters. Was the PMO coordinating on strategy with the RCMP and Justice Department? How could Norman get a fair trial if it came to that, if the Prime Minister's office were involved in the prosecution? Post Media asked the PMO to explain where Trudeau received his information the case was going to trial and whether the office had other interactions on the Norman matter. The PMO would not comment. I jumped down. The investigation into Norman has been extensive. Police have interviewed more than 30 individuals, staff at Davie and affiliate firms, at the Department of National Defense, at Public Service and Procurement Canada, and a number of federal cabinet ministers. The RCMP obtained 9 search warrants examining Norman's home, cell phone, and computers, Davie's office, and those of its lobbyists, and internet and phone service providers to Spencer Fraser. While Norman's correspondence with Fraser contained raw language and candid observations, there appears to have been no actual transfer of classified information or cabinet confidences in those messages. The RCMP did find a memorandum to cabinet marked secret in the office of Top Hill plus Knowlton office Merceau, but there's no indication that it's connected to Norman. No charges have been laid in relation to the matter against anyone at Hill and Knowlton. And in a statement to Post Media, the firm has said none of its officials are under investigation of any kind. The federal police force has already been warned that its case against Norman may be on shaky ground. In an April 21 ruling on an application by a group of news organizations, including Post Media, to make public the details of the search warrant executed on Norman's home, Ontario Superior Court Justice Kevin Phillips pointed out the problem the RCMP faced. The fact that Norman was communicating with industry officials, Phillips said, doesn't mean he was guilty of anything. Quote, the emails in question are by no means smoking guns, Phillips said in his ruling. Phillips also pointed out another possible explanation for Norman's emails. For decades, Canadian military procurement has been a mess. Norman found himself in the midst of a situation where the acquisition of a supply ship the Navy badly needed appeared to be headed off the rails due solely to political considerations. The judge specifically noted that none of what Norman did was for financial gain, but was instead to ensure well-being of the Navy and his sailors. Sorry, everyone. I've been talking for a while. Back to the article. At its highest, It appears that the potential allegation against Vice Admiral Norman is that he was trying to keep a contractual relationship together so that the country might get itself a badly needed supply ship, Phillips wrote. A reasonable member of the informed public might understand the frustration of being Vice Admiral of a Navy that cannot on its own go more than a tank of gas away from port. An officer of his rank would be expected to develop and maintain relationships with those in the business of supply, the Navy, and his communications with such people are not, therefore, in and of themselves untoward. Oh man, there's still a bit more. Okay, so sorry. Phillips highlighted another potential problem with the RCMP investigation. For a case to stand against Norman, prosecutors will have to prove that the naval officer was the first in a leaky Ottawa to have shared any cabinet confidences in question. Quote, to be found to have been the leak which breached cabinet confidentiality, the remainder of the information loop must be found to have been airtight, the judge said. Even if Vice Admiral Norman was putting information into the public domain, that might not mean he was first or only one to do so. If he was not the first, was he certainly breaching confidentiality? If the information was already revealed, would he necessarily have been engaged in a serious and marked departure from the standards expected of an individual in a similar position of public trust? Postmedia has confirmed the identity of a second source whom the RCMP alleged to have leaked the cabinet confidences. While the RCMP was aware of the second suspect from the beginning of their investigation, their focus has remained on Norman. The second source, an employee of Public Service and Procurement Canada with no link to Norman, has also not been charged, but unlike Norman, is still in his job in Ottawa. He has not responded to Postmedia's request for comment. And we'll look at that too. That's the most recent development. There is also the possibility, back to the article, that a third individual may have been involved in supplying Davy with insider information. In a November 24th, 2015 email, Fraser told Norman that an individual he called the Wolf had been providing the company with behind-the-scenes information. In their sworn information to obtain the search warrant against Norman, the RCMP said they don't know the identity of the Wolf. Sources close to Norman say the officer also has no idea who the Wolf is, nor has Postmedia yet been able to identify that person's identity. Or confirm that person's identity, sorry. The Liberal Senator Colin Kenny points out that the details of the November 19th cabinet meeting would have been known initially by dozens of government officials. Such details are quickly disseminated to various senior bureaucrats for planning purposes, explained the senator whose job in the office of Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau was at times to coordinate and prepare cabinet confidential information. Those bureaucrats, in turn, pass the information to their subordinates. In addition, political staff are also aware of the information their cabinet minister bosses have discussed. In the Norman case, information collected by the RCMP indicates that at least 4 senior bureaucrats had initial knowledge of cabinet's decision on Project Resolve. To claim that Mark Norman is the only one with such information is ridiculous, says Kenny. He appears to me to be the designated fall guy. And we're very close to the end. The Asterix, the vessel for which Norman fought, was launched in October and will be the Royal Canadian Navy's main lifeline for warships at sea for the foreseeable future. There is widespread acknowledgement in the Navy, privately at least, without Norman's advocacy or Project Resolve, the Navy would for years have continued to have no supply capability of its own. How long would Norman continue to be suspended? In December, approaching the 1-year anniversary of the removal of his number 2, Postmedia returned to Chief of Defense Staff John Vance with questions about the state of the Norman matter. How long would Norman continue to be suspended from duty? As a matter of policy, removals from command should be temporary, except the most exceptional circumstances, with the decision to continue or cease that removal period at a later date when all of the information is known and full procedural fairness can be accommodated, said Vance's spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Jason Prolaw. Sorry, I've got your name wrong there, Lieutenant Colonel. Did Norman receive a hearing before being removed from command? The spokesman declined to comment out of deference to what he called an ongoing investigation. In some Ottawa military circles, there is a belief that government intends to make an example of Norman, that his legal bills mounting as his state of limbo stretches on indefinitely. His family will at some point be under enough financial stress that the Vice Admiral will be forced to resign. And this is the beginning of 2018. This is almost a year ago, and we're still not very much closer to a resolution on this. And here is Justin Trudeau on April 6, 2017, saying, quote, this is an important matter that is obviously under investigation and will likely end up before the courts, so I won't make any further comments on that. And here's why that's a big deal. Norman's lawyer, Marie Henin called Trudeau's comments inappropriate in a statement to CTV News. Politicians, including prime ministers, should not be commenting on whether a case is likely to end up in court or not. To do so is not only prejudicial, but inappropriate, Henin said. It is solely within the discretion of the police, sometimes in the consultation with the Crown, to make charging decisions. No such decision has been made here. I expect what the prime minister meant to say is that he declined to comment further, given that the matter is under investigation. And that is what he should have possibly said. Before I found the National Post article, I had collected a bunch of different tabs to show you kind of the timeline, but that article laid the timeline out. I'll still include the tabs. It's worth looking at them. This is on June 27, 2018, so 6 months ago. General Vance orders permanent removal of Vice Admiral Norman from his position. Here's the Conservatives spending an entire question period, and I'll show you. Here's the National Post article about it. Quote: Tories devote the entire share of question period to grilling Trudeau over Mark Norman case, and yeah, this is a big deal. Here is court filings in Mark Norman case offer first details of how a bureaucrat allegedly leaked the cabinet documents, and it's not Mark Norman. So, quote, at 2:07 on November 17th, 2015, a public servant named Matthew Machette emailed a prominent Ottawa lobbyist to relay some exciting news. Quote, I've got everything, the motherlode, Machette's email said, but it also said his BlackBerry's phone was kaput and he needed to know where to drop off the material. 1 minute later came the response. Here, if okay, wrote Brian Merceau of the public relations and lobbying firm Hill and Knowlton Strategies, which had Quebec-based Davies Shipbuilding as a major client. Just leave it at the front. Lots of funny folks wandering around here. I figured, that's why I asked, Machette replied, less than 1 minute later. Merceau would later tell an RCMP investigation that when he arrived the next day at his office on Metcalfe Street, there was a package in a brown envelope waiting for him. Inside were documents that were to be presented at a meeting on November 19th, 2015, where a federal cabinet committee would debate the future of a $700 million project to acquire a supply ship from the Navy from Davie. The RCMP would seize the documents, including a PowerPoint presentation deck and a memorandum deck, in a raid of Merceau's office 6 months later. And the November 19th meeting is at the center of the RCMP case against Vice Admiral Mark Norman, who faces criminal charges of breach of trust over accusations he leaked classified information in a bid to prevent government from canceling the Davie project. So it's interesting. I showed you this because this is from a Freedom of Information package of emails, and that seems bad, right? And it seems like Machette or maybe Knowles or Hill and Knowlton should have some kind of consequence, but instead they're going both barrels against Vice Admiral Norman and not saying anything about these guys. Now, Norman's legal team is saying that the Prime Minister's office has documents that will exonerate Norman, or at least give him a fair trial, which is the goal. And Justin Trudeau has said that his office can't offer those documents because Stephen Harper would have to be consulted. And that was written in an article, and Stephen Harper weighed in via tweet and says, quote, this story is false and should be corrected. I have indicated no objection to the release of any document relevant to the Norman case. This is a transparent effort to deflect attention from the current government. And yeah, I think so. So the Mark Norman file is the official list of those who knew about the discussions on the supply ship project, according to the PCO investigation. So there's quite a long list here of people who were aware of the contents of that meeting and the fact that they were going to kick the can down 2 months. They were going to delay the project 2 months, project resolve 2 months, basically in order to kill it was everybody's worry. And somebody leaked something to the press and they didn't kill it because the press were, they did their job. This is the most up-to-date article, and this is the Crown pushing back, saying, no, this isn't political at all. This is us trying to get to justice. So I'm going to read this article because it's interesting. So Crown prosecutors have pushed back against suggestions of political interference in Vice Admiral Mark Norman's criminal case, saying there's no evidence to support such allegations. Quote, the suspended military officer's lawyers have alleged the case against their client is politically motivated and want access to documents held by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's office to prove it. Crown Attorney Mark Coven said Monday during the fourth day of a 5-day pretrial hearing that the narrative has emerged that the RCMP, its investigation, and the prosecution have been tainted by political machinations. That's schemes. There's a suggestion being made that throughout media articles, and there's been a suggestion made here in this courtroom, that somehow the Crown has been influenced or under the suggestion of political forces, Coven says. But he went on to defend the independence of the RCMP investigation and prosecution, adding that the Crown has specifically asked Norman's defense team to present any evidence to show the case has been unduly influenced. Quote, "We made the offer to the defense on this point. If you have something, we want to know what it is, and we'd like to see it," Coven said. "There is no evidence whatsoever to support these allegations." It's really funny. They're saying, listen, we need your documents to prove our client is not guilty. Maybe there's political funny business going on here. And they're saying, prove it if you've got something. Ha ha, we've got you. Checkmate, sir. I mean, you can play chess with a pigeon, right? But it's still just going to walk around the board, knock over the pieces and shit all over the board, right? Like, you're not winning when you purposely misunderstand and don't push the conversation forward. Like, you're trying to chase your own tail, and we see that. Okay, back to the article. Norman's lawyers have previously pointed to comments that Trudeau made in 2017 and this February before the senior military official was charged as political interference. Trudeau said that the case would end up in court. Quote, "The PMO may have made comments to the media, other members of Parliament, and may have made comments to the media," Coven told Justice Heather Perkins McVeigh. "The question is, has that somehow infiltrated its way into the investigation or prosecution? On that point, Your Honor, we submit that there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever to substantiate such a claim." Norman's team also filed as exhibits last week emails about the case between the Crown and the Privy Council Office, the top federal department in which bureaucrats asked prosecutors for updates on witnesses and dates. Defense lawyer Heinen alleges the Privy Council office was passing information to Trudeau's office, which she argues was to delay Norman's politically sensitive trial. It is set to start in August and could be ongoing during next fall's election campaign. Heinen wants to access potentially thousands of government documents, many of them potentially political secrets held by the Prime Minister's office, to prove that her client is a victim of political games. Coven, however, countered that the Crown, quote, "walked that line appropriately" in its discussion with the Privy Council office and was transparent with Norman's lawyers about any meetings or exchanges with the government. Many of those discussions relating to the release of documents that Heinen requested, Coven said. Jumping down a bit. As for why Norman was charged while another civil servant who allegedly leaked cabinet secrets on the same project was not, Crown Attorney Barbara Mercier said that an investigation into the other bureaucrat is ongoing. However, Mercier said we're talking about apples and oranges, saying that the other official was a lower level employee. He wasn't the commander of the Navy. So, interesting, right? Like, it's very interesting. To me, this seems like a coordinated political hit job, and if they're requesting documents straight up to the Prime Minister's office, it seems like somebody high up is coordinating this political hit job of somebody who outmaneuvered them to make sure the ship got built. So weird? Seems really weird. There's a lot more to this story, and I don't know it. This is 40 minutes, 42 minutes and counting right now, and I think I've just covered the basics. Really, I think there's a whole lot more to pick out on this story. And I mean, the man overboard, that's what this source article was called, is very, very good at really getting into the details. But I don't have near enough time to tell you all the details. Like, I tried to do it all in one video, and I tried to do about half of it, and I had to break it into two because it's just too long. So this is a complex story. This is going to blow up in people's faces, I think. And I think they're trying to make it go away by just kicking the can down the road long enough to wear Norman out. I think that's exactly the strategy. I mean, they've cut off funding for, there are funds for people in Mr. Norman's position through government to support any kind of legal fees, right? They've cut that off for him, saying that he's beyond the pale. He's not been found guilty, but it's in my first video, I believe. And so they're doing what they can, and they're maneuvering legally here. And that should scare the heck out of you. It scares the heck out of me. This is terrifying. And this person is not somebody with a long history of I don't know, selling government secrets or anything to that effect. This is a person who was really honestly trying to get a ship built to make sure his Navy remained a Navy and not just a Coast Guard, right? Like, we see this? It's pretty scary. It is a very scary bellwether, and the canary in the coal mine is dead, right? So what do you do? What do you do? Thanks for watching. This is probably the scariest story that nobody reported about in 2018, and it's going to carry on until at least August of 2019, because that's when the trial is. The pre-trial hearings that they're talking about now will conclude in a trial in August. So that is scary, how long you can be in limbo, not knowing what's going to happen. And the people in charge of writing the laws and who have purchased the media are walking around like they're morally superior and right. It's scary. It is very, very scary. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful, wonderful New Year's Eve. Stay safe out there. Really, stay safe. And make sure you drink some water before you go to bed. Happy New Year, everybody.